You know that Keeley Companies is all about fostering the world-class culture through their incredible cultural pillars. Well, it was time to add a seventh cultural pillar, Keeley Green. Guided by the mission to raise the sustainability standards by which they design, build, operate, and live, Keeley Green is dedicated to using a holistic approach to leave a positive impact on our environment, create a future that is sustainable for generations to come. In the words of Rusty Keeley, we are just getting started. You can learn more about that just getting started mentality and all the work they do by visiting my friends at Keeley Companies online at keeleycompanies.com.
Welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. John is the #1 national best-selling author of the book On Fire. He's a world-class inspirational speaker, and he's the host of the Live Inspired podcast. John interviews extraordinary individuals on their life story so that you can wake up from accidental living and more fully live your life story. Here's your host, John O'Leary.
Well, hello, my friends, and welcome to the Live Inspired podcast with John O'Leary. Today, you are in for an absolutely inspirational, joyful, challenging ride. So I encourage you on the front side of this one to buckle up and get ready for it, because I have the opportunity of bringing you someone who's inspired me for as long as I've been following her work. And when you hear about her work, when you hear about her story, when you hear about where she came from and what she's doing today, you're going to be inspired not only by her story, you're going to be inspired by your story. And maybe most importantly today, brothers and sisters, you're going to be inspired by the stories of those who look, act, vote, worship, move through life completely differently than you. So let me give you a little nugget into who this woman is and then bring her onto our show. Here we go. Diane Kahn, that is today's guest. She is a teacher. She's a mother. She's a social teacher advocate, and she's the co-founder of Humans of San Quentin. Humans of San Quentin is an organization that helps share personal stories of incarcerated individuals to foster awareness and to build connections between those inside and outside prison walls. The wild thing about Diane's journey, she began haltingly and awkwardly with one individual. And that one story of compassion, of biography, of poetry, of storytelling, of humanity grew into another and another and another. And now thousands of stories like this are being told, not only in San Quentin, not only in California, not only in the United States prison system, but indeed around the world. It's a remarkable story. She's a remarkable individual, and I've got the delightful joy of bringing her to you right now. So here we go. Buckle up, my friends, as I bring on my friend, and now yours. Her name is Diane Kahn. Diane, welcome to Live Inspired with John O'Leary.
Thank you for having me today. I'm just honored that you want to hear my story and want to uncover all those voices that are tucked away in all the corners of our world. So thank you.
Well, before I hit record, you and I have already laughed together. We've cried together. And then finally, I'm like, Diane, you're wasting your A game on me. Let me bring my friends to the party. So I'm bringing them in right now. They are now part of this conversation. If one of them happened to meet you somewhere in the Bay Area, just randomly at a coffee shop, and they introduced themselves to you, and then you back to them, and they said, Diane, what do you do? How would you answer that now?
I do get that question a lot, and I've really had to learn how to truncate it over the years. So I tell them that I interview people around the world and put their stories up online.
So I know your story, and I recognize you are being wildly broad in that answer. So when you say I interview individuals from around the world, well, that's what I do too, Diane. So you and I are in direct competition. You're a little bit more narrowed in, though, on the individuals with whom you interview. Talk a moment about that. Who do you interview?
Sure. And when I give them that intro, John, it also gives them the out, because a lot of people don't want to hear about what's happening in prison. They're afraid of it. And it's a way for them to say, do I want to engage this conversation, or are we going to go and talk about something a little more superficial? So it does give a broad stroke view. I think if I start out in the beginning of my story, it will then shed light on where I am today. I've been an elementary school teacher, and in 2017, I was on the School of Education Board at the University of San Francisco. in 2017 and found out that they had a presence inside San Quentin, and I jumped on it. So here I am in a classroom teaching men how to get their GED, and they come from all walks of life. And their vulnerability and truth to me was something that I felt like was injustice or in crime not to share with the world. At that moment, I realized that all that I'm learning, people around the world need to learn. So it's been more of a learning journey for me. So at that time, I was also following an online platform called Humans of New York. And what Brandon Stanton did is he went downstairs and would extemporaneously take pictures of people in New York City, dusted off his camera, and would interview them. I'm doing the exact same thing in prisons around the world. So I went to a friend inside, Juan, and he had been incarcerated for many, many years and still is. Journalist his whole life. He says, Diane, I've always wanted to share the men's story in blue, and I've never had the platform. So we launched right prior to the pandemic hitting, and I had my roster. And what we do is we ask guys inside, since 90% of the current population is men, the other 10% that we are housing are women. So we decided to share their story through one memory. So it took off like wildfire during that pandemic. I had only planned on walking into San Quentin, interviewing a few people, and putting it up online. With the pandemic, I had my roster. We sent out an introductory packet. Juan literally started sharing it from cell to cell. And fast forward now to 2025, we are in over 185 prisons in the US. I've been in prisons in Oslo and Dublin and Medellin and Guatemala City, Mexico City, just got back from Melbourne in December. So the one thing that sticks most out of all this for me is the kindness in people.
I'm going to hit pause just for a moment on this story and then come back to this idea of from being in and out of prisons around the United States and around the world, you are most stuck and struck by the fact that the kindness that is on display. That's ironic and unbelievable. So let's come back to that for a moment. The story began, though, with John, I was an elementary school teacher. What kind of kids were you teaching? What was the classroom you were looking at as a teacher like?
To be very, very frank, I was teaching affluent, mostly white kids at a Catholic school in San Francisco. And then when my husband and I got married, we moved out to Marin County, taught at another beautiful private school there. And I thought I had a huge impact. I thought I was doing a good job. And then picture me standing in front of a classroom, and Rodney, his name's Pitt, is inside San Quentin, and he wants to get his high school diploma. And he has a picture of it that he eventually graduates with, and he wanted it before his granddaughter got it. And he's Black from LA, and the ripple effect of teaching him is startling compared to the child that I was teaching prior.
I've obviously heart not only for that little Catholic school that you spoke to and that those kids that you were bringing forward into life, but also those that you are serving who are currently incarcerated. And I'll say this to our listeners and viewers, whether I'm walking into a boardroom or an arena, I get a little nervous, but there is no anxiety I feel like when I'm pulling my car up to a place that on the side of the street usually has the signs, absolutely do not pick up any hitchhikers, right? And then as you get closer, you realize why, because you're approaching a prison. Then there's a sign that says, leave everything you brought with you in the car. Leave your phone, leave your keys. You're bringing nothing metal in. You're bringing nothing private in. You are exposed in this place. You get buzzed in. You're in a holding area. You get buzzed in again, and then you're in general population. And you are no longer free at all. I've done this more than a dozen times, every single time. Even with the kindness that you referred to, I am extremely nervous. Here you've come from a classroom where you are speaking and loving on these kids who are just affluent and beautiful and awesome. And now you walk in for the first time. What's that first time that you walk into San Quentin like?
It's eerie. And you can speak to it a little bit. There's this calm. There's this very regulated. There's not a lot of high emotions. There's not a low emotions from anybody ever. So there's guards in towers that have guns down on you. And I don't know if this is the right word to use, but There's a piece to it. So you're in a controlled situation. So I actually feel safer inside prisons than I do walking freely.
Wow.
Because the people that I am coming up against have a very dark, nasty place to go to. Should they do something to someone free like me, they will find themselves in solitary confinement, in concrete walls, and have no voice. My voice is superior. So they can typically stay up there in there for anywhere from 30 days to 90 days without anyone hearing their story, even if they ever do. So they're not going to do something. They kind of have me on a pedestal.
You mentioned kindness. It wasn't the word I expected you to bring up first when you're talking about your first experience and these encounters with the population within San Quentin and then other places. What do you mean by that? John, what struck me most was their kindness.
So when we went live that summer during the pandemic, and also when I sat in the media center inside San Quentin with Juan, I look at him and I said, Juan, I don't know if I can do this. There's victims. There's such a big pool of victims on every single story we're going to share. And he's in this wheelie chair. And on one side of the wall in San Quentin is the front page paper of every newspaper that they have published, written by incarcerated people. And he turns around, he says, Diane, don't worry, it works. And in the back of my head, I had my Catholic mother saying to me, the good always wills out. And it has. So here I'm afraid of the victims, and I just throw caution to the wind. We go for it. And it's amazing on the outside how, when you look at someone's person and you look at their humanity, that inside each and every one of us lives this kindness and this tenderness. And it is shown again and again with every story we've put up. We've put up over 1,500 stories of people, and we don't hear the backlash, John. We don't. So I think when you really sit down and you listen to someone else's story, you find that there's more that binds us together than tears us apart. And that is the success of Humans of San Quentin.
Why does the story of one person matter? Why does it help this individual who you're in front of, or the classroom, or San Quentin, or Southern California, or the world, or whatever it is, that individuals are beginning to identify their story and then share that with others?
I think you can then reach into yourself when you hear that story, and there's a common ground. You're making connection. Oh, this person, something in their story may resonate with you. And then you realize you're on a level playing field. And at that moment, that is when someone is able to then take away that bias or that potential narrative they have on them and actually live in their shoes. And for me, that's where I think we can go against what the media is portraying as these bad guys. I used to drive my kids by San Quentin, all four of them. Mom, what's that? What is that?
Right.
San Quentin, what is that, Mom? Well, that's where we house the bad guys. So I'm on a mission to change that narrative, to change what people think, to really drill down and look at the reasons why this happens and hopefully plant seeds of change and build our world differently.
Yeah, and if many of our listeners probably have not driven by San Quentin. For those who have not, it's a monstrosity. It is an enormous structure. I think it's 130 years old or whatever it is now. Big, thick walls, terrifying looking place, and those people in quotes who are paying for their crimes behind those walls, and now you get to know them at a human level. When I was preparing for our conversation, I was thinking about my friend Jean Valjean, and about halfway through the book and about halfway through the play, when he rips open his shirt and he says, essentially he identifies, 24601, that number that they tattooed on him that reminded him of all the things he'd done, of all the crimes he'd committed, of all the years he'd served, but it no longer defined him anymore negatively. And I think to a degree, as you help these offenders, these human beings identify their stories and in part what led up to it. You're also liberating them to rip open their shirt and say, yeah, that's part of it, but it's not all of it.
I think the most startling thing to me, and I've sat down with so many people inside, it's very common and everyday to you and I, but you turn to someone in prison and you sit there and you simply ask them, how are you? And it's going to bring me to emotions now because so often you get tears. People don't ask them how they are. Most of their childhood, most likely, they were not seen or heard. I remember asking teenage girls in Guatemala City, they were 16, and asked them to share their stories and gave them a piece of paper and told them if they were more comfortable to write it. And they looked at me dumbfounded and they didn't understand what they were saying or what I was asking because no one had ever asked them that. I mean, I would assume that you and I, when we were in first, second grade, maybe we had our summer vacation and the teacher says, you know, tell me your story, your little narcissistic self at that point told the story. No one did that. They don't know how to. No one's reflected on them. So there's a huge cathartic therapy that happens when you're able to turn in and make someone accountable and look at the impact that has been done on them as well as their impact with their actions on the world.
I think sometimes the more narrow we go, the more broad we can be in its effect and its an impact. So rather than talking about all the prisons and the country of Guatemala and San Quentin and everything else all the places you are, let's just be focused on a couple for a moment. Share with us the story of one that you got to know, a story that you got to be a part of, a life whose ripple effect you are now kind of washed with. So give me a couple examples of individuals that you've had the ability of learning their stories. They've then also had the ability of learning their own story and how that moved you, that individual, and also others.
That's a loaded question. I come across a lot. But there's someone that just came into our meeting inside San Quentin. So each week, I have a team of 10 men inside that run our program inside. And Freddie came in. His real name's Jose, and he's all covered, face is covered with tattoos. And he came in simply to thank us. And he said, I want to thank you first for being here, and I want to share my story with you. And he had it on a piece of paper and he just planned to mail it in. And I said, well, how do you feel about sharing it? And John, he goes on about how he'd been discriminated his whole life because of the tattoos on his face. He was married with kids. He would be pulled over. He would be kicked out of restaurants. He was always had this burden of hate on his shoulders. So he gets sentenced. He comes to San Quentin. After a little bit of being there, he applies for a job in the canteen or the cafeteria. And the woman there says, no, I can't hire you. You look like you're going to be a bunch of trouble. And he really took that personally because he knew he was a good person and he knew he wasn't trouble. So he went back, got a couple other jobs, got a lot of recommendations, went to her. And she said, gave him a review after a while and said, you're one of the best employees I've had. And that night, he's in San Quentin, sees one of our flyers up on the wall and writes to us. And he says it was the very first time in his life he was able to let that anger roll off his shoulder. So Jose is a story of how each of us have things bottled up, right, that we need to share. So it was beautiful to sit with him, and I was in tears, as you can imagine, sitting in that cold classroom with barbed wire on the top of it. So it was moving. It's moving.
You mentioned earlier on that you were in front of a group of kids who relatively prestigious little Catholic school in the Bay Area. I have that version of those kids in the Midwest where I live. 4 children, Catholic schools, great education, great educators. And from kindergarten on, we write about summer vacation and Christmas holiday and the Easter celebration. Like we write and we write and we write. And yet it's still challenging for me to get my kids to recognize, how do you begin the storytelling of your life? Like, it's even for kids who spend a lifetime writing, it's hard for them to understand, how do I begin looking in the mirror and writing about what matters to me? you're doing this with adults who have never had anyone really put a pen in their hand and say, look in the mirror, look back, shut your eyes, now open and write. How do you begin that process for individuals who have never done it before?
I treat it very much like a conversation, just getting to know somebody, as if you and I were at a cocktail party. Very much leading with empathy, leading with vulnerability myself. Pretty quickly, I would say within a minute or two, and you've asked them something about themselves, something comes up that is interpersonal that I know someone's going to want to hear, whether it be the bad day they had, whether it be their mother passing away, whether it being somebody 2 cells over committing suicide, whether it being on the telephone with their son who just had a birthday. Um, so for them, it's very vast. What am I going to say? Because they have stories that many of us will never be able to touch upon. But it comes pretty quickly once you start talking to them. And also, I think inside each and every one of us, if we were to say to each other right now, what do you want to say? If you had that audience, what would you say? So they do already have something kind of residual in their mind. It just takes a few questions and a little bit of kindness that will then be able to bring that out in them. But it is hard. And the team that I was telling you inside, and we do have liaisons around the country. There's about 50 different prisons that can sit down and help us. That it really takes a while. Sometimes it's 6, 7 letters. Sometimes it's a guy going back to that cell and sitting with his buddy 3 and 4 times to get it out. But it's hugely rewarding.
So it leads ultimately to them, whether it's a poem or a story or a moment in life that mattered to them or changed them in one way, getting published. I'm curious, when they see their story, their life, their words published, how does that affect these individuals?
That is by far my most favorite question that you're going to ask.
Well, good, because I'm about done. That was my last good question. From here, it's done. It's just downhill, listeners.
Mic drop. Here we go.
Finish strong.
So you heard my story as to how I began. I want to share their stories. As a forever educator, I want to educate the outside free people, right? I knew I would have some kind of small impact on people inside. I had no idea what was coming our way. So we have about 60 people that work for us. 58 of them are volunteers. And 35 of those are high school interns that come into our office after school. And what their main role, amongst carrying most of the workload, is their main role is to correspond back to people incarcerated. So what they do is we take screenshots of every comment and every like that has been made and anonymously send them back inside. We also send a letter and we send a certificate of vulnerability. So for me, I don't feel like I ever want to take from that population without them knowing the impact they're having out here. Mm. So I can tell a story of Michael Moore. So Michael Moore is our inside communications director. And everybody probably has seen the metal stairs that go up and down in the prison. And he's walking down the stairs and he sees this guy coming up the stairs that he's never met, and he's hitting his face. And he turns to him and he's like, wow. He's like, what happened? He's like, I got my packet. He's like, I got my packet back from Humans of San Quentin. He's like, I'm alive. There's really people out there that hear me. And of course, Sean, you can hear my voice again. I'm so much in gratitude of what we do and just for the hope that we can bring inside and the joy. So most of them don't feel heard. So again and again, I mean, I've heard from people inside that were going to commit suicide before they heard from us, which I still have a hard time believing. They're able to connect with family. We have a story recently, a guy who called and he got married. They have kids, and it's beautiful. It's more of a communal healing for us, and I believe makes our lives a little bit safer out here and potentially that much kinder.
In your heart and the work that you do and the profound effect you're having nationally and internationally. So I'm going to ask a question broadly from the community and then specifically from someone who may have been a victim to one of these crimes. It could be the other side of the story. So for the folks right now listening to your emotion and our conversation, thinking, I'm glad this is happening, but at the end of the day, they did the crime, man. Put them behind walls, lock the door, and let them serve the time, period. To those people with that perspective, why does this work matter? Not only to those who did the crime, but also to the people with their arms crossed, lobbying that conversation our way.
There's two ways that I'm going to answer that. One is 90% of the people that are incarcerated are going to walk out here one day. So how do we want them to be? Yes, we can lock them up and then just open up that door, not give them any kind of rehabilitation. So for that, I feel like they need to be given services to be able to rehabilitate so they don't come out and reoffend. There's a huge negative imbalance as to what we do for the offender and what we do for the victim. So we spend billions of dollars, John, locking people up. Our taxpayer dollars are getting thrown at these people. The survivors are literally given nothing. They are not giving any kind of resources. They're not given any kind of help. That is hugely wrong. There's two sides of that equation, and half of it is not even being looked at, which I have had the luxury of being able to sit down in our podcast, the prison podcast, where for the first time I'm brought into a conversation between someone who has harmed someone and someone who has been a recipient of that harm, and to sit down with the two of them. And I think I'll let you ask me questions here and dive into that so you can best guide it.
I'm going to follow your lead mostly. What I will say is, Jean Valjean broke a window pane and took a loaf of bread. And I think for that, he did 19 years and then more for trying to break out. When you talk about harm, some of the harm that was done, this includes harm against body. This includes sexual assault. In some cases, this includes murder of a loved one's family member. So this is indeed the kind of harm that just stirs anyone. And you get to sit down with someone who has harmed someone and someone who has been on the receiving side of that. So I'd encourage you, because you've had these conversations, I've listened to them, but you've sat with them. Talk us through one specific, guide us through that conversation and what was going on. And as you prepare yourself to identify one of my favorite quotes from Henry Nouwen, who's a great theologian and spiritual writer, he writes, "What is most personal and private is also most universal and sacred." So it's easy for us to sit back passively as we drive to school today or work out right now or sit poolside or whatever we're doing while we listen to the conversation, thinking about those people out in San Quentin who did this thing or experienced that crime. And I just encourage us, as Diane's about to share, to recognize the mistakes we've made, the harm that's been done in our lives, the animosity we still feel, the anger we hold on to, how we feel about the people who did that to us, or vote differently than us, or worship differently than us, or have different passports than us, the little crimes done against us, and how we feel anger toward that. And what Diane's about to unpack is far more intimate in so many regards, and yet through that intimacy, far more personal for all of us.
So there's so many that I could bring up, but when I think about a pair that I interviewed in our podcast, and it was Elle and Alan. So Elle lost her daughter to a drunk driver, and Alan was that drunk driver. And Elle's daughter was 21. Alan had obvious alcohol issues, and he has to walk out of his truck right outside of a Starbucks down in LA and look at that little girl lying there. Then there's Elle, who's in Florida, and she does everything she can to get Alan behind bars and make him pay for his crime. And then she realizes once he's sentenced that nothing within her changed. She thought that there would be this peace, that justice would be served. And there wasn't any of that. She also knew in the back of her head that there was a human behind that. And there is this man that created the most damage in her life and forever changed her. And she didn't know anything about him or who he was. So she sits down face to face with Alan inside prison after a lot of prep on both of their sides for months. And she sees him. This is going to bring me to tears too. She has a daughter who's now gone, and she's going to come face to face with this man who took her life. And she walks into this room where he's chained in front of a table. And she sees the emotions brush over him and the ones that she has. And the first thing out of her mouth is, I have a hug for you. So Elle is miraculous in that she was able to sit and really uncover with Alan everything he had been through and where his life had been to that point. And now, fast forward to today, Alan is still incarcerated in California. I met him inside San Quentin, but he's now been transferred to another prison. And she has been doing everything in her power to get him out, to release him. So that right there speaks volumes, right, to the human capacity to accept someone else. And that was the most startling thing that came out of the podcast for me, is here we have these victims, and I feel like I'm carrying a torch for people that are incarcerated. But John, I do not hold a candle to them.
Yeah.
I mean, they go back into prisons and they are advocating and doing everything they can to get these people released and to help rehabilitate.
I spoke years ago at a conference for essentially kids within the foster care system and some of the struggles they were dealing with downstream. And the person who spoke for me shared the analogy of standing by a riverside, and a child is floating down through white water, and they recognize the child's going to die. So the person jumps in and saves this child. And then now there's like four on the riverside, and they see another child coming down. And so everybody jumps in, pulls this child out. It happens again and again and again. And then finally, one of the people at the riverside starts walking away. And everyone says, "Where are you going, man? We need your help." And he finally says, "Well, I'm going to find out where these kids are coming from in the first place." The idea is like, go up to the top of the source. Like, what has led to all of this? So as you've spent all this time in San Quentin with these offenders, with these criminals, with these people who've done harm against themselves and others, what have you learned that has led them ultimately to this? And then as a society, what can we begin doing to one day close these prisons because there's no need for them? I know that's a pie in the sky of vision, but if it's not a vision we have, well, then what are we doing here at the riverside, watching child after child wash downstream?
It's something that pops up instantly in my mind all day long with the work that I do. I like to think of it as the game of life. So let's say someone, pie in the sky, you're arrested today. Someone's arrested today. In an ideal world, we would look at them and say, are you here because you're poor? Are you here because you're uneducated? Are you here because you have mental illness? And then help them accordingly. Instead, we're taking the drug addicts, we're taking the poverty, we're taking the mental illness, and we're housing them and not giving them services. That is a big nut to try to change, but I'm super hopeful and I'm an eternal optimist, and I believe that we can get there. I think by you and I just talking now, people listening, that we can plant those seeds of change, and hopefully there will be someone that lives near a prison somewhere, little tiny town in Ohio, drives by that and has always wondered and been curious. Maybe they will help an organization nearby, or maybe they'll walk themselves in there. So I think there's so many facets to what we can do to change our perception, or simply once you've heard us talk today, or you do any kind of listening surrounding incarceration, you'll be a little softer. We've gotten asked recently to come and talk in a couple different churches, and there's a beauty in that. You're able to then see, and I refuse to ever get up on stage and talk myself without having someone previously incarcerated by my side. So when you actually are there and you can shake that person's hand and see them and hear their story, you realize that, gosh, maybe the media is a little bit different than I was thinking.
That answers the question from the perspective of those incarcerated and the humility and empathy we can show them and see them as brothers and sisters again. I mean, this is one big family. Help me better understand, and I'm asking for a lot here, but help me better understand what do we do though to alleviate it before it gets to prison? You talked about, yes, seeing them as impoverished, seeing them as uh, not just a mental health crisis or a drug addiction. How do we go farther upstream and meet that challenge before it becomes one?
I think it's important on a really basic level to talk about people's trauma. I think if people were taught a little more how to break down things that happen in their life, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume with you and I and our kids, should something go wrong in their day or them be crying or we notice a little bomb goes off in their life, we do talk about it. I think that's important. I think victims that have been hit by these crimes are important to talk about. But on a grander scale, I also think it's important that we show a little more kindness. We go out and vote. We look at someone who's maybe been previously incarcerated applying for a job. Maybe look at them. There's someone that I could refer or offer a job to. So I think there's a lot we can do on our own little level, right? Instead of trying to tackle it, like what can one person do at a time? So I look at it as groups like mine, get involved with it. There's one near you, right? And underserved somehow, give back. I think it just makes our world a safer place. I also think we're living in a beautiful time when you look at everything that is coming by with wellness. People in their 20s, early 30s have been very much educated and been brought up with wellness. They seem to be a much more sponge-worthy group that can look at people for their humanity and not necessarily someone like me who's in their late 50s and lock them up, three strikes, they're out. So we're sitting in a really beautiful time to be able to look at humans individually and see what they really are like and what they deserve.
So you're speaking in part today to our audience, and I'm sure some of our audience are currently finding themselves literally behind bars, but the vast majority are not. And yet, um, they're dealing with isolation and they're dealing with regrets and they're dealing with anger and they're dealing with the harms they've committed to others and harms they've had committed against them. And they're dealing with lives that just haven't gone the way they intended. What encouragement after helping these leaders write their stories and create poetry and have these photographs taken and all the other work you've done behind bars. For those of us on the other side who sometimes feel as if we're behind them ourselves, what encouragement would you have for us?
I think gratitude, there's a word that's used a lot now where we say live in the moment. I think that's hard for anybody to really do. Your mind just can't do one thing. Living in the moment, having gratitude, and potentially knowing there's someone worse off than you. But you could also be on a street corner and be drug addicted too, and not be very, very gratitude. But this is how I think of it when I'm walking in these prisons, and all of us have kind of heard that term, give that person a smile, and maybe the only one they get that day. I live for that when I'm in there. So I don't know exactly how to answer your question, John. I think knowing that there's people out there for someone, there is help should you need it. There is a friend that will listen. I think that's the key, is leaning on each other, making a connection. And that is our kind of the whole philosophy behind what I'm doing, is to know that you're not alone. We're all connected. There's people in prison that do affect us, right? So leaning on each other, talking about what you're going through, being vulnerable, right? Compassionate. Those are terms that when you really open up to someone else, you realize that it was good.
Mm.
It was worth it.
Diane, for those who want to learn more about whether it's the podcast, the poems, the stories, the photos, the mission, where can they learn more about the work you do?
So we have a website, humansofsanquentin.org, and we're also on all the social media channels. We're on Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, you name it, TikTok. So we're on all the channels.
So we have 7 questions that tether all of our mighty guests together. So I'm going to walk you through what we call the Live Inspired 7. 7 short fire answers and questions. Let's rock and roll together. Question number 1 is, what's been the most impactful book you've ever read?
Stones from the River by Ursula Hedgie.
Tell me about it.
Gosh, it's an old one, but it talks about a little person in Europe and her struggle. And it's enlightening.
What's one positive characteristic or one beautiful trait that you possessed as a child that you wish you exhibited as brilliantly today?
Joyfulness.
That kid must have been pretty joyful. The woman in front of you is a very joyful woman in and outside of prison. If your home caught fire, you and I talked earlier about the 4 kids. Oh, the kids are out, the family's out, the pets are out, everybody's out. But you have an opportunity of running back inside and grabbing one physical item. What's the one thing you would grab from your house?
Okay, you're going to crack up right now. So I was living in San Francisco, teaching 4th grade, and middle of the night, the house catches on fire. What is the one thing that I grabbed? The whole place went down. The one thing that I grabbed was, back in those days, early 90s, I grabbed my teacher grade book.
That is committed. I'm telling you,
Kids,
teachers are committed to the process.
my kids were pissed that I had all the scores from all their tests they took.
That is so awesome. So there it is. I mean, I won't make you answer it any other way other than we've heard from you from the past experience, what you grabbed. So thank you for that. If you could sit on a bench on a gorgeous Bay Area day and have a long conversation with anyone living or deceased, who would you like to be next to?
Michelle Obama.
What's the best advice, Michelle, your mom, some prisoner, anybody else ever gave you? So the best advice you've ever received is?
When they go low, we go high.
What would you tell your 20-year-old self?
Well, I would have just watched that movie Silence of the Lambs, and I would have watched Jodie Foster go down in that basement. And I wanted that back then, John, and I didn't. I didn't go for it. I would be a different person today had I gotten into prison reform back then. So I know not exactly the answer you were looking for, but yes, that was one of those flags that went off in my life that point us in the direction that we're supposed to go into. And that was God giving me one of those signs that I didn't take back then.
Yeah, and had you gone in, you are now working with the FBI, flying down to Nashville or wherever Jody was for that meeting instead of being on this podcast, impacting thousands and thousands and thousands of lives around the country and around the world. So maybe I'm glad she didn't follow that advice.
Oh, you're so sweet. Thank you. It's so touching to hear that you care so much, and I'm just glad that you sought us out and want to hear it. I mean, that's a huge heart. A lot of people don't go here, so I appreciate you for being you.
Diane Kahn, I appreciate you for being you. And the 7th question is this. It has been said that all great people can have their lives summed up in one sentence. How would you like yours to read?
She was thoughtful and caring.
That is so underselling, and I love it. So this woman who began an international organization to remind people the value of their life was indeed thoughtful and caring. So Diane, thank you for the work you do and the lives that you're impacting.
You're welcome, and thank you.
My friends, that is Diane Kahn. My name is John O'Leary. Today is our day. It is a gift. Live inspired. Well, my friends, I hope you enjoyed the conversation with our new friend. Her name is Diane Kahn. I'm certain that I did. One of the things Diane mentioned with me during our conversation was the story of Jean Valjean. And one of the quotes from that play, one of the quotes from the film that I love so much is from Jean Valjean near the end of his life when he says, to love another person is to see the face of, and then he barely is able to whisper out these words before he passes away, of God. To love another person is to see the face of God. During our conversation today with Diane, whether she was raising her kids at home, she raised four, whether she was working in front of fourth grade kids, or now today in front of prisoners around the country and around the world. One of the things she instructs us on, not just through her work and through her life, but challenges you and I, is the opportunity of loving the one in front of us. To love another person is to see the face of God. So if you're looking for a takeaway today from this Live Inspired podcast, why not grab onto this one? Seek to love the one in front of you. Why not start with the reflection staring back at you in the mirror? If you enjoyed this episode, there's two things you can do to expand on it. Number one, tell one person that you party with, that you worship with, that you work out with, that you work alongside with, that you listen to the Live Inspired podcast. Share this with one individual who might be liberated from receiving a podcast like this from you. It's a great way to expand our impact. It's a great way for us to set another prisoner free. So share the podcast today with those around you in your life. It will make a difference, I promise you. And the second thing is, if you want to take another step into a journey like this one, why not check out one of my favorite human beings, one of my favorite composers, one of my favorite musicians, one of my favorite people. His name is Eric Genius. Eric, I recorded a couple years ago, episode 290. We'll have a link to it in the show notes. But Eric Genius is a brilliant human being and one of the most compassionate, generous individuals I've ever read about, ever interviewed, ever shared. You're going to love it. So check it out at episode 290. We'll have a link in the show notes. My friends, I want to thank you for tuning in this time. And until next time, my name is John O'Leary, and today is your day. What a gift. Live inspired. Keeley Companies was started almost 50 years ago by the one and only Larry Keeley. What started as a small family-owned paving company in St. Louis has grown to a nationally known full-service construction, development, and restoration partner. Larry the Legend, as he is affectionately known, has been a part of this growth every step of the way and continues to provide guidance as his son Rusty, my buddy, drives their vision and achieves results on purpose. His unwavering foundation of a family culture with a focus on people has gotten Keeley Companies to where they are today, and their journey is truly just beginning. To learn more about Larry the Legend and Keeley Companies, check them out at KeeleyCompanies.com.